Welcome to another episode of No Butts About It. And today we have the legendary Joe Komo of the Cardinal Rule back with us. Yesterday, the Cardinals decided that they weren't getting enough internet time or something, and they decided they were going to make every transaction they possibly could. It seemed every time I got an ESPN alert, it was the Arizona Cardinals. So, welcome back to the show, Joe, our resident Cardinal expert.
Well, it's good to be back. I am a legend in my own mind, as dad jokes like to espouse. But no, yeah, I'm glad to be here hanging out with you again. And yeah, Cardinals keep it in the news cycle, but it could be worse. They're in the news cycle for actual football transactions and moves rather than stuff about contracts and all that kind of nonsense. So yeah, there's some things to talk about for the Cardinals.
There is. So, starting off with a name not a lot of people might know. I honestly don't know a lot about him. So, that's where you come in. Hopefully, you can educate me, educate people watching this video. Josh Jones, offensive lineman, 2020 third round pick. He was traded from the Cardinals to the Texans along with a 2024 seventh round pick for the Texans' 2024 fifth round pick. What did you think about that trade? What do you think about Josh Jones?
So I like Josh Jones as a player, and the trade wasn't a complete shock. There had been some conversations about both amongst local fan bases and even some of the national media. Mike Renner from PFF had kind of tweeted out, and a few other folks said that Josh Jones might be a candidate to be traded. So you have to go back to when he was drafted in the third round. He came out of Houston, which, the college, and now he's back at Houston. So that's probably nice for him, unless he hated it there. I don't know. But, he was drafted in the third round as a tackle by the Cardinals. And when they selected him, he actually, a lot of people thought he would go earlier. There was pre-draft conversations about him as a borderline first-round pick. He had a really outstanding pass blocking grade coming out of college, one of the highest that PFF has actually recorded over the time that they've done what they do. So this is not like someone who didn't have some sort of pedigree, if that makes sense, even though he was maybe a little bit of a guy who slid for some reason. There was something there. And the Cardinals drafted him, and, his rookie year and his second year, he got a little bit of playing time. They had they already had, starting tackles. So he was a little bit, in a log jam there. So they played him some at guard. And he struggled at guard. He wasn't great, PFF grades kind of in the 50s. But he's a talented player, and last year was sort of a little bit of a breakout season for him. DJ Humphries got injured, and he was forced into a starting role at left tackle and graded in the mid to upper 70s. Solid PFF grades, looked good. So to me, he is a starting caliber left tackle. But the Cardinals drafted Paris Johnson Jr., who is probably their left tackle of the future. This year, he's going to be right tackle. They have DJ Humphries under a big contract. Humphries, is a veteran, but he's got a big cap number. So they had sort of a dilemma, if you want to call it that, or at least there was still for Josh Jones a logjam. They have DJ Humphries, Paris Johnson Jr. They brought back Kelvin Beachum, who was their starting right tackle last year, who, listen, fans have mixed opinions of him, but he's graded solidly in PFF grades in the 70s. He was the only offensive lineman, I think, that started every game last year. So even though he's an aging vet, he was healthy. So they had four guys who legitimately were starting caliber tackles in the NFL. Maybe not high level tackles yet for some of them, but four guys. So, you typically want two tackles and a swing tackle. So something had to give. Now, Josh Jones is on the last year of his rookie deal. And if the Cardinals brought in Paris Johnson Jr., then I don't think they saw Josh Jones as a long-term, part of the plan. Certainly they could have, moved on from DJ Humphries next year, moved Paris Johnson to left tackle and played Josh Jones to right tackle. But because he's on the end of his rookie deal, you're going to have to pay him. And he wants starter money, I'm sure. I mean, in fact, I think he deserves it. He played well enough. And I think in free agency, when he hits, if the Texans will probably try to extend him, I imagine, if they traded a pick for him. But if he were to have hit free agency, if the Cardinals held on to him, What was going to happen is someone was going to pay him a lot more than you might think, because starting left tackles are hard to find.
Mhm.
Coming out of college, he was good. He played well when he did play. I think he's going to get at least $10 million a year somewhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, when he's a free agent, maybe I'll be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But like someone's, you know, scouting departments and coaching staffs and front offices, they know who he is. They know what he did in college. They've seen what he did in the NFL. And if you're a team that needs a starting tackle and you're hitting free agents and you see a guy like Josh Jones, who doesn't have a ton of tread, you know, kind of worn off and tired because he wasn't a full-time starter, has played well in the NFL, was a good prospect coming out, you'll pay him more than the casual average fan might realize. So the Cardinals had not committed to him as a long-term starter. And I think part of that is Monty Ossenfort comes from the Patriots organization. They had a lot of success finding offensive linemen all through the draft, even in day 3. And with Paris Johnson Jr. being their left tackle of the future, I think, you know, Josh Jones would have been a right tackle. And I think Monty would, rather than pay what it would take to keep Josh Jones long-term, I think he was more looking at it like, I can find a right tackle in the 5th round who we can coach up and who's going to be good and who's going to be cheaper. And from a long-term perspective, let's go with what we got now. So I think they made that decision for those reasons. And just knowing that he was going to walk away, you know, when this was first kind of starting to float around amongst Cardinals fans, my thought was, well, okay, but if they could keep him and when he walks away, they get a compensatory pick, because I think he'll get a good contract. But, you know, if the Cardinals are planning to be active in free agency next year, which they'll have the money to, then the way compensatory stuff works, if they sign and bring in players, that offsets his loss and they wouldn't get a compensatory pick. So in one sense, what trading him away also potentially signals is that they do plan to be active in free agency and they wanted to get a draft pick for him now, because they don't think they're going to get a compensatory pick for him because they're going to offset his loss with signings. So in the end, they got a 5th round pick, sent a 7th round pick. You know, a lot of people said they should have got more. Trades at this point, you know, in the year where basically what teams are doing now is where they have excess depth, they're shipping guys off and trying to get something for them, right? And you don't see big trade compensation typically this time of year. You see 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks. So, you know, I get some people thought they should have got more from, they weren't going to get more just based on the way trades are right now. So, you know, what they did is, instead of keeping Josh Jones this year, they're going to have Kelvin Beachum. Yes, he's older, but if they weren't keeping Josh Jones beyond this year, it doesn't matter who was older, right? Having a young player only matters if they're part of your future. And if he wasn't part of the future, based on all the contractual things that we've talked about here, what they just decided to do was, we'll keep Beacham's under contract for 2 years. Yes, he's older, but we'll draft a right tackle of the future. We'll go with Humphreys and Paris Johnson Jr. as long as we need to. And good luck to you, Josh Jones. We'll get a draft pick, send you to Houston where you played college. So there's my very, very long and detailed answer about Josh Jones, more than you probably thought you wanted to know.
No, I love that, because, again, Josh Jones isn't a big media name. A lot of offensive linemen aren't, but they're such a key component of the team. And I said this, I think the last episode me and Chus filmed together, I'm a Bengals fan. I've seen how important the offensive line is. I've seen how quickly offensive line depth can just fall away. I did some research on Josh Jones, and according to PFF, he played 622 snaps, only had 9 penalties, which is kind of middle of the road. You want as little of those as possible, obviously, but he only allowed 4 sacks that PFF blamed him for, I guess. So having him in Houston now with CJ Stroud coming in, having some other young guys coming in, I think Houston Texans should be very excited to have him, and I think you kind of shared that sentiment as well. So
yeah, absolutely. He's a solid player. Yeah, I was going to say, in fact, there was a part of me that really actually was hoping is a strong word, but wondering and maybe even considering the idea that they would have moved DJ Humphreys and kept Josh Jones and Paris Johnson Jr. and then extend Josh Jones and have them be the bookends long term. But as much as I, kind of part of me liked that. I also understand their approach. And from a, again, from a roster building perspective, you have to take into account, maximizing the costs and contract kinds of things for the salary cap. And if Monty believes he can find gems in the draft from what he did with the Patriots, which they found gems in the draft and in undrafted free agents, their starting center, Andrews, was an undrafted free agent. So I get it. Like, instead of paying him whatever it was going to take to extend him, get a guy on day 3, keep him for that rookie deal, and then extend him if you need to, or replace him with another pick. So, yeah, I would have liked to kept him. He's a good player, but I understand from a roster building strategy perspective that there are other ways to fill that position, and they have some guys that can do it now. So they're better kind of to use that salary cap resource in other spots.
Good. So another young guy who was traded yesterday, who I was shocked. This one surprised me because I thought he had been doing very well in Arizona. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't follow them as closely as you do. He was a 2020 8th overall first-round pick, Isaiah Simmons. He was traded from the Cardinals to the Giants for only a 7th-round pick, which I know you said in the comments of the comment I made on your video about Isaiah Simmons that, hey, it's late in the season, you're not going to get a lot for these guys, like you said previously about Josh Jones. That still seems like not a lot to me for a guy like Isaiah Simmons, who is playing 2 positions. I would rather have seen him play 1 position wherever they thought he would fit best, see how he does there. But they decided to move on from him. Is this another example of Jonathan Gannon just being like, you're not going to be part of what we're building here? Or what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a couple important points there. I think most Cardinals fans, or at least the ones I hear from, are in agreement with your sentiment that they really should have let him kind of find his sea leg, so to speak, at 1 position before they moved him around. The previous coaching regime just moved him all over the place, tried to use him like that chess piece that everyone talked about. He was coming out of Clemson, and he was that for Clemson, but the NFL is a different game. And my thoughts are he had deficiencies as a linebacker and he had deficiencies as a safety. As a linebacker, he struggled against the run. He made some big plays, but he also struggled against the run. As a safety, he got beat in coverage with leverage. Too many plays where, like, you see he gets beat by a route and he's leaning the wrong way and he tries, to make up for it. And, and those deficiencies, I think if they had stuck him at 1 position and kept him there, he probably could have worked out some of those deficiencies in one of those positions, but he was trying to work out deficiencies in all those positions. And with him, like, his PFF grades, I think last year maybe in the mid 60s, it wasn't horrible overall in terms of grades. There were some nice plays, but there were also some mistakes. And it felt like a player who has tons of talent, but was making mistakes, right? And I agree, and a lot of fans agree that they should have kept him in 1 spot. So in comes Jonathan Gannon, and they say, we're going to move him to safety. And he hasn't played well in the preseason. In fact, the last game, now he's been with the starters, right? And the starters played against Kansas City about 14 snaps, I think, or thereabouts. And they kept him in with the second unit. He was the only one of the few starters, if not only starters on defense, that they continue to stand. Which that with preseason, you can't read too much in performances in preseason unnecessarily, but you can read some things into it. And I look at who's on the field, that tells me something. Like, if you're not on the field much during the preseason, either that means they have a defined role for you, or you're not likely to make the roster. And if you're on the field a lot, that means they're probably trying to evaluate you further. And if you're if you're with the starters and they keep you on with that second unit, that tells me they have you penciled as a starter right now, but they're wanting to kind of get a little more evaluation of you, right? So there were signs. So I wasn't shocked about the trade, maybe a little surprised, just not in that I can't believe they did it, but more like, oh, wow, okay, there it is in the news. So he played really poorly in that second game. And I know, again, it's preseason, small sample size, but when you've in your fourth league year in the league, and you've played a lot of snaps like he has, you should be better, even if you're still kind of figuring a few things out. And there was one play on a touchdown where you've probably seen it, where it looked like he was running at and just seemed to, at the last second, kind of didn't really commit to trying to tackle and stop. Just a play that really has been kind of flagged as not a lot of effort. So for whatever reason, they didn't like what they saw, and they don't see him as part of the future. And they were going to play him at safety. They already have two really good safeties, Budda Baker, Jalen Thompson. But when they play, cover three, or they could still have all three of them out there, or move one of them into the slot, so that they could still have made it work. But they do have two good safeties already. So, I think when they look at it, it's like, okay, last year of his rookie deal, right? Like Josh Jones. So if he's part of the future, that means they have to extend him and pay him, right, a good contract, whatever that would take to do that. And I think they just looked at, from all the things they saw, they didn't feel confident that was going to be the case, and that they would much rather bring in a rookie and develop that player and have that cost-controlled rookie contract, instead of having to immediately sign to an extension this guy who has not lived up to their hopes. So I think that all added up to, there was an opportunity to trade him, and they did it. And this is, obviously the GM and coach didn't draft him, so they don't have, strong ties to keep him around for that reason. So they sent him off, got a 7th round pick. I do think the compensation felt a little low, even within that context. Maybe should have been, maybe I would have, I wish it would have been more like at least a 5th, but at the same time, people sit back and say, oh, they got fleeced, but like, general managers probably, Monty Osborne knows what he's doing. And if he got a 7th round pick, that's probably the best he was going to get. Really, to be honest, I don't think Monty's not going to, he's not stupid, and
Right.
We saw what he did in the draft. So that's what the market apparently was. I wish him the best. He's got all the talent. He is smart. And I think it's just they didn't give him a chance to develop at one position. Hopefully for his sake and his career, the Giants will do that. But Cardinals fans, there's some that I think there are Cardinals fans that are upset they didn't get more for him. But most Cardinals fans at this point, at least, again, the ones I interact with, their perspective is Steve Keim messed up this team and just really did a bad job drafting, in terms of, Simmons is a talented player, but taking a middle linebacker number 8 overall, right? So I think a lot of fans are just looking at it like Monty and Jonathan Gannon are cleaning up the mess Keim left us, and any of those players that from their tenure that we let go, we're just, unless it's a beloved player like Budda Baker, right, or something like that, I think Cardinals fans are just gonna be like, well, that's what Keim did to us, and we're excited about what Monty Ossenfort is bringing in.
That's funny you say that, because I was seeing, not Steve Keim, but I was seeing Cliff Kingsbury getting blamed for stuff. Like, people were saying if Cliff Kingsbury would have coached this guy better, he wouldn't have gotten traded. And I was like,
because he's an offensive coach.
Yeah, I was like, that doesn't make sense. But
people who follow it will talk about Vance Joseph. I says people who follow this, at least follow the Cardinals, understand and will blame Vance Joseph, right? And it was probably, he probably deserves some blame for that. But Steve Keim should have never drafted a player like Simmons that high, in my opinion. So
okay, it seemed like around that time every team wanted a chess piece like that they can put in wherever, and the only teams that I can think of that have really been successful with that are the Steelers with TJ Watt, and then the Cowboys with Micah Parsons. Other than that, it seems like having a guy on defense play multiple positions doesn't usually work out. And Isaiah Simmons had really weird stats on PFF. He had the 3rd most tackles by a safety, which could possibly be because he was playing that linebacker position. But he also was targeted 74 times and allowed 62 receptions on those. So he only broke up 12 passes, according to PFF, all last season, which highlights your point about him struggling in coverage as a safety. So,
yeah, and what you need to keep in mind with PFF, how they identify positions, is it's literally they identify at each snap, they identify where you are on the field and assign a position based on where you're at. And literally there's like almost like it's like a formula or in their system that whichever position you have the most snaps at in their database is what it lists you as. So I've seen him listed as linebacker, cornerback, and safety because he played a lot of slot corner. In fact, last year I think he ended listed as a corner. So it lists so that I think what you're talking about with those tackles is probably an artifact of the fact that yes, he had more that season, had more or overall maybe in his time with Arizona has had more snaps at safety, but he's played still considerable amount at linebacker, which probably, brought those numbers up a bit.
Right. So, I guess you've kind of already spoken about this a little bit, but maybe get a more explicit answer. Would you have preferred keeping him this season, putting him in one position, or at least having him at depth? And then if you lose him next year, it's okay, we've seen what you can do at one position rather than getting the 7th round pick. Because honestly, those 7th rounders, it's kind of like, what are you going to do with that unless you somehow nail a Brock Purdy? But what's your opinion on that?
So this is what's tricky about this is, that a lot of my view on that pivots on the question of whether the Cardinals plan to be active in free agency or not. Because like I talked about earlier with the Josh Jones situation, if they plan to be active in free agency to where, whatever he signs for is going to be offset in the compensatory calculations by who they add, and they weren't getting a compensatory pick, I absolutely would rather they get the 7th round pick. And it's not even about the pick. For me, it's actually more about if they're not bringing him back and they're not going to get a compensatory pick for him that's better than that, let's move him on so that players like Keitrell Clark and when he gets healthy, rookie Garrett Williams and some of the other young players can get on the field, right? For me, it's actually more about the roster spot and the snaps going to players that I want to see develop, who I think are going to be a part of the future of the team. Now, if they based on, and they make these kinds of decisions in part having an idea what their strategy is going to be going into next free agency off season. So if they went into this with the idea that no, we're not going to go crazy in free agency, we're going to build through the draft and sign some value pieces, and we're going to try to get compensatory picks, then I probably would have leaned towards wanting to keep him. See if he hits, great, consider an extension. If he doesn't, or if they don't re-sign him to an extension and someone else pays him, then we get a compensatory pick. But if, as I am now starting to suspect based on both of those trades, they do plan to bring in some free agents and not necessarily be in the compensatory pick game next year, then I think it was probably good to move him, get something for him, but more importantly, free up snaps and a roster spot for someone that they're trying to develop as part of the future.
Okay, so that was very good analysis. I just wanted to know your opinion on that because for me, the draft is kind of a lotto, especially when you get to that 7th round. It's like, who are we actually working with here? So, the final trade that went through, and this was actually my favorite trade, and it had nothing to do with the Cardinals. It wasn't I thought the Cardinals made a good trade or anything. It was, we put out that video about Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I don't know if you saw it. And we said he was going to end up being the backup, and our whole comment section was like, you guys were insane. There's no way he's going to make it past QB3. Well, the Browns they dropped Kellen Mond, and then they traded away Josh Dobbs to the Cardinals. They traded him with a 2024 7th round pick for a 2024 5th round pick. So this, you guys have a lot of depth at quarterback. I was looking at your guys' depth chart, and unless it's not updated, it looked like Colt McCoy and Jeff Driscoll were still on there, along with a few other guys. So why do you think they decided to do this?
Well, they always say if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. Well, we have 6. So what does that mean for us? Right, So obviously there's Kyler Murray recovering from the injury. uncertainty as to when he's going to be back. I know some people think that he's not, and there were some rumors we talked about before about that. Some people close to the situation think he won't play this year.
We're gonna get to that.
I think that's we'll hold off on that then, okay? And we'll talk about it in a moment. But like, you have Kyler Murray, who is probably going to be back this year at some point. Hint, hint. That's what I think. Then you have Colt McCoy, right? Who's been the backup for a few years. We all know who Colt McCoy is. He's been around the league forever. Smart, knows his stuff, has been in a lot of systems, doesn't have elite arm talent, but he's a guy you want in your quarterback room as a mentor, right? So love that. But he struggled this preseason. Now, again, preseason is preseason, right? So who knows? But he also had some sort of injury, some sort of procedure this offseason that hasn't been talked about a lot. And then you have rookie Clayton Tune, who has seen a lot of snaps in preseason. He's had some good things, some bad things. He's a rookie, right? 5th round pick. You mentioned Jeff Driscoll and also David Blau, who actually started a game for us last season, who is of fame from Hard Knocks with the Detroit Lions. That's where you maybe have seen him from before. So then they add Josh Dobbs. So like, what does this all mean, right? Well, I think when you look at it, they're probably planning to go into the season with 3 quarterbacks, which, you know, in the COVID and post-COVID era, I think most teams do that after seeing what the Broncos went through when they had a little bit of an issue there. And, you know, so I think most teams try to keep 3 quarterbacks on the active roster and then 1 on the practice squad. Kyler is likely to start the season on the PUP list, which means he has to miss at least 4 games. Now, he might not, but I think that's probably a good likelihood, and I think this trade signals that is an increased likelihood, or isn't it, or at least there's a higher probability, right, that he will start in the PUP list, that they're bringing in Josh Dobbs. So what it means for Kyler, though, I don't think is much other than it maybe increases our suspicions that he will be on the PUP list at minimum, right? So now we have to talk about what does it mean for the rest of the quarterbacks down the depth chart, right? Well, okay, Colt has had some injury history and struggled. And so I think it signals that maybe they're not as confident in Colt starting being the starter while Kyler's out, right? Potentially. Clayton Tune, again, has looked up and down. You know, he's had highs and lows, but it's also been against second and third stringers. And he's a rookie. So I still think they like him as a long-term backup. But I don't know that they're ready to start him either. And David Blau, we've seen a little bit from him. They know what he is. He's smart. He's got some experience, but he's also been a guy who's bounced around practice squads and as a third stringer. I don't know. He's a nice guy to have around, but I don't think they want him to start either. And Driscoll, we haven't really seen much from him. I think he's more a camp body practice squad candidate, not in serious contention. So bring in Dobbs, right? Enter Dobbs, who was with the Browns, which is where our offensive coordinator was last year, Drew Petzing, right? He comes from the Browns, so they know him, right? So they know what he's about. They've seen him, they've coached him, right? Petzing has coached him. So, you know, when someone brings a guy that they've coached before in, that tells you something, right? That they're familiar with him and they like things about what they've seen. So, I think there's a chance Dobbs could be starting the regular season while Kyler's out. If he isn't, then at minimum, I think he's going to be one of the 3 quarterbacks that they bring in. If Colt McCoy is going to start, or if they go with the rookie Clayton Tune, you know, then Dobbs, though, is going to potentially be, you know, the number 2 or number 3. So I think it's to be determined. We have a game tomorrow, preseason game against the Vikings. It'll be interesting to see, you know, who plays and how much they play and how well they play. So I don't have a firm, this is what I think Dobbs' role is going to be, but I do think he's in the running to start while Kyler is out.
Wow. So now we're going to get to the rumors, the fun, interesting stuff. This is the meat, I think, of what's going on with Cardinals media right now. Pro Football Network reported that Kyler Murray could possibly not play this year at all. They didn't say why. They didn't say if it was because of injury or if there's another reason he might be sitting out. And I thought back to last season's drama with the whole video game contract and that whole thing and needing to watch film. Could there be him sitting out? Is that a possibility? Do you think it's injury? Do you think he just is mad at the team for some reason?
I think it's clickbait.
Okay.
Clickbait and fake news. So here's the deal. Everything we have heard out of the new coaching staff about Kyler is that he is working hard. He's in the building. He's in the meetings, and he's showing them everything they want to see. There's nothing I've seen or heard that suggests there's any kind of rift going on. If there is, and listen, we know that the national and the local media is got him under a microscope because of how, things went last couple off seasons in the news cycle, right? He's been kind of the whipping boy for the NFL media, right? He's been an easy target, to be honest. And so I feel like if there were some sort of something off the field going on, we would have heard it. And I haven't heard anything like that right now. All I'm hearing and seeing is he's working hard. He's in the building early. He's in the meetings. He's asking questions. He's doing everything they're asking of him. And every time they talk about him very positively and without reservation. Now, I get that if you're a team, you're going to say, there's the whole media spin thing, but I don't think there's anything going on. So to me, I think any question of whether he's going to play this year completely revolves around the health thing. Okay. The recovery from injury. Now, one of the other popular narratives, which I'm not really buying into, or at least I think people don't really understand how this works, is the whole they're tanking for Caleb Williams thing. The NFL is different than the NBA. Teams tank in the NBA, sit players, do things in the roster to get that number 1 overall pick or to get, more balls in the draft lottery for the NBA because, you get the LeBron and it changes the face of your franchise for a long time. Now, I get that a quarterback can change the face of your franchise, that first overall pick, but there's a bigger roster in the NFL. And if your team suspected you were tanking, it does some things to the morale and the culture. You have to build a culture with 53 players of we work hard, we get everything. You need that second string tight end to buy into the culture. It's you can't just do this tanking thing. It doesn't work. Now, you can, if you wanted to, create a roster that's not likely to win, right? In an attempt to do that. But even if you're doing that, people misunderstand that roster teardowns are not about we're trying to get the first overall pick. They're about we're trying to clean up the roster, get the overpaid players off because of the salary cap, get players that maybe didn't fit the system or the culture out of here, bring in young players that we've drafted while they are on those cost-controlled rookie deals, get them playing so they can develop so that 2 years from now, when we're ready to contend, they have experience under their belts, and build a roster using sound roster building strategies where you draft premium positions, you take advantage of those rookie deals, you bring in value free agents to plug holes, and you find your quarterback, right? Teams that are doing what the Cardinals are doing now, or the Texans, or what other teams have done in terms of that rebuild, it's not about trying to get the number 1 overall pick or whatever. Now, if you get that is a benefit that comes from that process, but no one is saying we want to lose as many games as we can so we can get that first overall pick. What they're saying is we need to reset this roster. We need to install our systems and culture, bring in the right kind of players, and build a foundation through the draft. And that process typically results in losses, right? But I think teams also, they want to end their league on a high note. If you're one of those rebuilding teams, you don't want to go 0-17 and get that first overall pick. You want to maybe go through some kind of growing pains, but you want to end on a high note. You want to win some scrappy games, and you want to have momentum so that next year when you come into the building, you can say, look we're building something. Look how we finished. We started a little rough. That's okay. But we won, 3 out of our last 7 games, and we've got something we're building. People who are saying, "Oh, they're tanking," don't understand how that works in the NFL. They're rebuilding, and they're going to probably be not a great team, but no one in that organization wants to lose a bunch of games, right? If they had the
Mm-hmm.
choice of winning 8 games and missing the playoffs in year 1, they would take that, even if it means they don't get that early pick, right? So where am I going with this? Kyler. Okay. They are not going to sit Kyler for the sake of that, right? For trying, quote unquote, trying to tank. But they do have potentially a decision to make next year's draft, because if they do get a number 1 overall pick, whether it be their own or the Texans, right? And they're in a position to draft Caleb Williams, or even if they're number 2 overall in the position to draft Mays, right? If they are in a position to draft a quarterback, they are going to evaluate and ask the question. They're going to just ask themselves, Monty Ossenfort is going to do due diligence and ask, okay, we have Kyler Murray, and we have a chance to draft this quarterback. What should we do? I don't think they are set on drafting a quarterback next year. I don't think they've made the decision, but I do think they plan to consider all options. So if you're Monty and Jonathan Gannon, you want to see how Kyler Murray looks in your system. You want to see how he looks running your offense. You want to see what he looks like in the huddle and on the sidelines. And you want as much information about him as you can get, so that when next offseason comes around and you're getting ready for the draft and you're trying to make this decision, do we build around Kyler, trade that over those early picks for a massive haul and build a strong roster and get a bunch of future first round picks? Or do we try to trade Kyler, take the cap hit we're going to have to take and just get it off the books, and then draft a rookie quarterback? And so to do that, they want to see Kyler play. So I think as soon as he is healthy enough to play, they're going to get him in there, as long as they're, not having a high risk of re-injury. They're going to want to see him. And I don't think he even has to kind of light the world on fire for them to want to build around. What they're going to want to see is, does he show signs of progress as the season goes along? Do we see flashes? Does he have a command of the offense, and does he get better as the season goes on? Right. So if they see enough in him, I think they'll look to build around him. And I'm a Kyler fan, Kyler believer, so I'd like to see that happen. But I have to recognize realistically they're gonna do due diligence, and they're going to consider all options. And drafting a quarterback would be one of those options they'll consider. But people who are just kind of in a very cavalier way saying, no, they're tanking, they're going to take Caleb Williams, they're going to trade Kyler, it's already decided, are just they don't know what I'm talking about. No one has decided that yet. I mean, I don't think so. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's just not how teams operate. And smart people like Monty Ossenfort running teams, they don't make those decisions ahead of time. They get as much information as they can, and they assess it. And Kyler, for whatever the haters want to say, I've watched every game. He has legit arm talent. There are probably 5 or 6 people in the NFL who can make the throws he makes. People talk about his legs so much. He has the arm to make every throw like that. There's probably 2 or 3 guys I think have better arms, but people don't think that about him because they think of him as this little running quarterback. You watch him throw that ball, deep throws, intermediate, he slings it. There are questions and issues he has to work on, but the arm talent is legit. And if the right coaching staff builds an offense that works for him and takes advantage of what he can do, I think he can be an MVP candidate again. So I'm excited to see and hopeful to see what they do with Kyler Murray end of the season and moving forward.
I think you bring up a good point about tanking. All these guys that are on a football team, they want to win. They're competitive. It's not that they love winning, it's that they hate losing. And so it is very hard to make an NFL team lose without, I think tanking has to be a front office thing. And it sounds like you don't think the Cardinals front office is doing that. Perfect example of this is week 18 with the Texans. They had the first round pick. All they had to do was lose the game. And they went out there and they won the game. And the second round pick was what they ended up with. They ended up getting Will Anderson Jr. and CJ Stroud with that, because they had 2 and 3 after some trades. But these guys aren't going out there showing up to work okay, I'm going to go get hit by a 300-pound man 50 times and then make sure we lose the game. No one is volunteering for that. So I think that's that's a very good point you brought up, that people don't think about the human aspect of the game itself. Something else that I'm kind of wondering is, let's say the Cardinals, they go out there, they try their hardest all 17 games. And I think that this is a real possibility. Even with Kyler starting, let's say he starts all 17 games, still get the first overall pick. It just happens that way. You've lost J.J. Watt, DeAndre Hopkins, A.J. Green, a lot of key players this season, in my opinion. And you might just end up with the first overall pick. If you draft Caleb Williams...
Well, it could be the Texans pick. We have the Texans first
that's
pick
true too.
So they could stink up the place and we get it, even though we don't have as bad of a season, right?
That's true. That's also an option. So you've got both those picks. Mm-hmm. Either one could easily fall into the first overall position. Do you draft Caleb Williams and then put him in quarterback competition with Kyler Murray, and then if Kyler Murray loses that competition, trade him?
I don't do that. If I draft a quarterback in the first round, I draft them to be the clear-cut starter, and I clear the decks of any other franchise quarterbacks, unless it's a guy who my starter is like at the end of his career, right? And then you're bringing in an heir apparent, right? You know, if you got a 38-year-old starting quarterback and you draft a guy that's different, but Kyler is not that. So I don't do that. No, if you are drafting Caleb, then that you're trading Kyler. You don't do that because you don't draft a quarterback that early to not make them your long-term start. It's a huge commitment as an organization, and that just creates so many complicated things in the building. If you have a guy like Kyler on that you committed to the big contract, like Kyler's like, okay, so clearly you don't believe in me, trade me, right? And I wouldn't fault him for that if that was the situation. So you don't do that, in my opinion. You make your decision, you commit to the guy, one or the other.
I agree. I agree with that thought process, and I can easily see that becoming a mid-season kind of narrative that like they're going to draft Caleb Williams, put him in competition, and see what happens. But I don't think that that's a good plan either. I think you'd end up with like half the players being Team Kyler, half the players being Team Caleb, and then everyone just hates each other. That's usually what happens in those situations. So I'm glad we're on the same page there. That was the last question I had for you. I don't know if you had anything else to add, anything I didn't ask. Are the Cardinals going to be better than people expect?
I mean, I think they'll be better than people expect, but that's such a low bar. Like, I mean, literally you hear people saying, this is the worst roster they've seen in decades kind of a thing. I don't think they're going to be, and usually when you, like, I always think back, like, you know, the Miami Dolphins first year under Brian Flores, like that to me was one of the worst rosters I remember seeing as an NFL fan in all of those years. Like I can't remember a worse roster, and they still won 5 games. I think it was right. They weren't 0-17. And so it's like oftentimes you have a team coming in that you think is going to be awful, and they surprise you, and not that they're necessarily always good, but they're scrappy and they win a few. I think the Cardinals have a good chance of having the worst record in the league, but I'm not convinced that they're going to. There's always another team that falls off the cliff, right? So, you know, but in terms of looking at the roster, okay, on the offense, people forget how good Kyler has been when he's healthy. And yeah, he's missing part of the season, but what happens if he comes in week 6, right? And they get 11 games with him, right? 10 games with him. Like Kyler can with if your defense kind of does enough, and they have some weapons on offense, as much as people want to kind of you know poo-poo them, like Kyler on a good day can hero ball you to a win, right? Like they can win some games, right? But look at the offense. Okay, the offensive line has had some new guys brought in. They've got some guys that are coming back healthy, and people think it's going to be like this awful offensive line. I actually think it's kind of deep and going to be kind of decent. DJ Humphrey's left tackle. He's a solid tackle. He's had seasons where he graded really well, seasons where he graded a little more average, but he's an NFL caliber left tackle who can be really good at points. Will Hernandez at right guard played solid for them. He's a solid starting NFL guard. Right tackle, you have Paris Johnson Jr., who was the first offensive lineman taken in the draft, and he's played well so far. He's done well through training camp in the preseason, so he's going to be starting right tackle. Left guard is Elijah Wilkinson, who they brought in from Atlanta, who's a guy who's been, he's a decent but not elite offensive lineman. He started a lot of games on tackle and guard, solid player. And then they brought in the center, Yelta Froholt, from the Browns, who, he was a former 4th-round pick drafted by the Patriots. So Monty probably scouted him or had some familiarity with that. Played for the Browns, so our offensive coordinator knows him. And, his PFF grades, he hasn't started a ton of games, but he started some in the NFL. His grades were reasonable. But when you look at it, like, he's like a guy, okay, I could see him taking a step forward, being a solid starting center. And he has played well in the preseason and looked good in training camp. And so with offensive line, and this is something Eric Eager, formerly of PFF, now of Sumer Sports, I had him on my live stream once, and we talked about this. And there's this research that talks about weak link versus strong link or approaches towards sports. And there are certain units where you want to have more of a weakest link approach. And what they mean by that is, you don't need to have elite players, but what you need to make sure you have is you don't have anyone who sucks, right? So like offensive line, you're better off having 5 good but not great players than having 2 elite players and 3 scrubs. Okay.
For sure.
Because the way that has to work. There are other positions where it's a little more towards you want an elite player, even if you have a few not so elite players, right? But like, they have those 5 guys, and then their backups are guys like Kelvin Beachum, we talked about earlier, who has started, right? And a few other guys that have played some games for them, maybe not elite guys, but guys who have played some games in the league. So when you look at that offensive line, I'm like, I think with the right coaching, and it's looked decent in the preseason, that offensive line could surprise people because it's 5 NFL caliber players. So if you have that offensive line playing better than they did last year, and it was awful last year, all right, and then you have Kyler when he's healthy, all right, and then you look at their weapons. They're, okay, people don't think they're elite, but okay, a Hollywood Brown is a good receiver. He may not be the guy you want as number 1, but he's got speed, and he's had 1,000 yards in this league before, right? So he's a good player. Zach Ertz, yes, he's old, but he is a good tight end. They've got Trey McBride, former 2nd-round pick, who came on late last year. They have Rondale Moore, who, if he's healthy, is good. Health has been the problem. Then they have Greg Dortch. If you don't know who he is, go check him out. He's a slot receiver. Every time he's on the field, he looks good. He's an undrafted free agent, but he's good. He is good. And then Michael Wilson, the guy they drafted this year, who, 3rd-round pick out of Stanford, who had some injuries in college, but he's looked really good, and he's looking like a starter. Now, is that an elite set of weapons? No. But that is not that's middle of the pack at worst, in my opinion, if they're all healthy. Okay. So think about Kyler with an offensive line that surprises people, and a nice deep set of weapons. Even if he doesn't have an elite weapon, a nice set of weapons, Kyler can do damage with that. Okay. Right. So if that offense late in the season when Kyler's back might surprise people. Now the defense, they need an infusion of talent, but they brought in a defensive head coach. And I think if he can coach up the guys they got, maybe if they can listen, they can be like the 23rd, 25th ranked defense in the NFL, and Kyler can do what Kyler does, and their offense kind of starts showing some stuff late in the season. I'm not saying they're making the playoffs by any stretch, but this is a team that could win 5 or 6 games and surprise people.
Okay. So with the opinion that the Arizona Cardinals are going to shock people, they're relying on the Houston Texans for that first overall pick, it sounds like.
I mean, it's a low bar to shock people with what the expectations are.
I think what I saw the over-under for wins for the Cardinals was like 3 on one of the sports books. So you're right about the low bar. But this was a very good interview. I've learned a lot. Hopefully the viewers learned a lot. If you haven't checked out Joe's channel, check out the Cardinal Rule. He does a fantastic job, fantastic analysis. He loves data, loves numbers. I always have a fun time in his live streams as well. Do you do those every Monday night? I know you did those for the draft. Do you still do those every Monday night?
So I had the mock draft Mondays during the season. I'm doing Tuesday nights, so we don't interfere with any NFL games. So Tuesday night live streams, some stuff post game. But yeah, Tuesday night's going to be kind of my regular live stream night.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, those are really fun to join. I enjoy them. Nice community there. Everyone's always been really nice to me, and I'm not even a Cardinals fan. So maybe this year. Maybe I'll root for the underdog this year. The Lions are going to be good, so I need to find a new lovable loser to root for. So we'll see.
You're welcome aboard.
But make sure to go check out Joe's channel. That's the Cardinal Rule. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss anything. We're going to post a lot of YouTube exclusive stuff. And then you can find the actual podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts. That's No Buts About It. So hope everyone has a great day. Thank you once again, Joe. I know this was a last-minute interview, but we made it work. It was great. Have a great day, everyone. As I drop my phone on the sound. Can you hear the crickets? Yeah.